Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dual Language Spot. We are live and we are unscripted for our, what is this? Our fourth episode, right, Jorge?
Yes, absolutely. Our fourth one. Yeah. So welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everybody. We're so excited. If you're watching us live, welcome. If you're not watching us live, maybe you're going to come back later today or tomorrow and you're going to watch this episode. You can find us in a lot of spots. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we are so excited to be here. We have a very special guest with us, and we're going to be talking about very interesting topics related to dual language. But just for everyone else who might be new to us, hello, welcome. My name is Juan Suarez, and I am one of the co-hosts here in Dual Language Spot. And Dual Language Spot is a project that both Jorge and I started. Our fourth episode. We're brand new. But we're interested about having conversations. We're interested about learning. We're interested about meeting new people. And we just want to talk about topics related to leadership, to language, to culture, and to equity. So yes, welcome everybody. Welcome
everyone to the Dual Language Spot. My name is Jorge Almodóvar, and I'm a dual language principal. The love, of course, dual language, supporting teachers, and especially I like to see our student growth and learn two languages. So thank you everyone for following us tonight. And also I would like to remind everyone that we are live on Twitter, on Facebook, and also on YouTube. And you can follow us at JJDLLSHP in all three, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. And also our main blog page, which is dlsspotblog.wordpress.com/. So welcome, everyone.
And people might be wondering, Jorge, like, man, how did you guys come up with that handle for YouTube and Twitter? Well, JJ stands for Juan and Jorge, DL, dual language, and then we have LSHP, which is a short for leadership. So Juan, Jorge, dual language, leadership kind of combine all together. That's how we came out with it.
Yeah, and this is the spot to talk also about dual language, and that's why we call it Dual Language Spot as well.
Dual Language Spot, that's right. Who do we have with us today, Jorge? What are we going to be talking about?
So tonight we have Crystal Jimenez. Crystal Jimenez, she's one of the, she worked with me as a principal in District 21. So I'm very excited to have her tonight with us and talk about MTSS process with dual language programming. So a little bit about her. So she is a daughter of Mexican parents who immigrated to the United States for better opportunities. She was born and raised in Chicago and is a product of transitional bilingual programs and received also ESL services. Bilingual has been always in her life, and she is very committed to supporting students whose first language is not English. She also taught bilingual and dual language for 10 years. Then she became an assistant principal. And after 3 years, she became now a principal in Wheeling. So nice. Welcome, Crystal Jimenez, to our show tonight.
Hey, Crystal, how are you?
Hola, hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Hola, amiga, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, muy bien. Emocionada, muy emocionada. I love that bio. Thank you for the introduction.
Oh, no, it's you. It's all you. Not. I just give you information about you. So no, nothing to thanks. So welcome to our show. Tonight we'll be talking again. This series of podcast has been also talking about advocacy and how we advocate for dual language programming and also dual language within the program. Also, how you advocate for different things. You advocate in curriculum. You advocate also with parent involvement. But today we're going to be focusing on MTSS and the MTSS process for all our dual language students.
Yeah. So I just wanted to jump in real quick. Advocacy, right? All of us have different roles, as Jorge mentioned, but what is MTSS? For if we have any of our viewers who might be watching us today, who maybe they are educators and they might know what MTSS is, but some districts call it differently. Some people call it other RTI, other people call it support. Let's just unpack what is that. What is MTSS before we jump in?
Right. So it's just also that multi-tier systems of support. Mm-hmm. This is also how we work our students from the core to give them extra help, reteach or enrich, or if they need extra help, we also work them, help them with some interventions as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To continue learning, in this case, the language that they need.
So extra support. Mm-hmm. Can we simplify it to that?
Absolutely, we could.
All right. Crystal, what do you think? What's new with you? Tell us a little bit about you before we jump into this topic about MTSS or extra support as a simplified way.
Well, thank you so much for having me, first and foremost. So I am the product of a bilingual program, and so I became very passionate and committed to the journey because of my experiences, but then also watching my family, experience just their journey here in America, right? I'm first generation, so when they came from Mexico. And, I feel like they created here in America, in their neighborhood, like their own little Mexico, right? So even though I grew up and was born and raised in Chicago, I feel like I was always surrounded by the Mexican or Hispanic community, right? And so I just, in my educational journey, I experienced, that picture. I choose it as a reminder of all those brick walls that came in my way, right? Like that's like symbolic of my journey in education. As I, those of you who know me, have heard stories of, professors or teachers just not really understanding me as a whole child. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why MTSS, it's so important in schools. And so now I just really focus on being that support to others, not just students, but now I think about staff as my students, right? And so as a principal, and so I think about just supporting, and even our families who come to, right, who are not familiar with the American educational system, being able to be a support and a testimony to others. So I'm a big believer of the phrase "si se puede," something my dad would tell me constantly when I was ready to give up, in many occasions. Si se puede, mija, si se puede, and so here we are. And I'm just really excited to continue to speak about something that I'm passionate about, and that the two of you share that passion as well.
That is so cool, Crystal. I share a similar story to you. I also came to the United States from Mexico, and I was in the bilingual program as well. And I agree with you. I think, that extra support or MTSS or RTI, however we want to call it, is so needed for all students, right? But in terms of dual language programming of students who are in a bilingual ESL dual language programming, there's kind of like a little bit of a difference, right? There's additional things that we have to take in consideration. And that comes the whole idea of advocacy, right? When we know that we need to do things and we need to advocate for our students and we need to provide them with the services that are going to help them be successful, going to level the playing field for them so that they can go get it. And as you say, si se puede, then we're rock and rolling. So I have a question. In terms of advocacy for dual language, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so to me, it means being the voice of those who can't speak up for themselves. And tying it to MTSS, I think about because MTSS is a big umbrella, right? And in there's so many components. But I'm thinking specifically to the MTSS meetings and who sits around those who is present at those conversations, right? And I think about my own experience, as you heard in my bio, and I just spoke to being in a transitional bilingual program myself. I didn't mainstream into gen ed till 6th grade, right? And I'm not critiquing the program I was a part of, but in 6th grade, one data point access or whatever was available then, right? Said Crystal's ready to go into general education. It's just like, whoop, sink or swim.
There you go.
And I've been part of those conversations as a student, right? Very capable at 12 years old to advocate for myself. I would have been able to say, no, Cristalita's not ready for that, right? Like she needs a lot more still. And so I think about even my parents, right? They didn't find out till my grades started suffering. I went from being a straight A student in my native tongue to then demonstrating not being as successful in English. So then they're like, ¿qué está pasando? That's really when they came to the school. It wasn't until they got my report card. So think about conversations that were being had about me, right? Or maybe not, who knows, right? And my parents weren't involved in those conversations because they didn't find out till my report card. So I think in advocating, it really is us as educators, we have that power, right? We have the power to bring up Ileana or Thierry to that table and say, okay, as a whole child, and looking at Thierry and Ileana, those are my kids, these kiddos need this, right? They either need support because they need support because they're not progressing or growing as adequate as we want them to do, or they need enrichment, right? They need more than what we're providing at tier 1. So that to me is advocacy. It's just speaking up, being that voice, using that power to support, to bring in those supports that our students need or speak about them.
Oh, thank you, Crystal. So I know that even before you, when you were a teacher, you also worked as an interventionist, right? And you just talked a little bit about your experience, you going through school and how things were with you. But then taking that experience of you going through that process and also your struggles, when you were an interventionist, how you brought those students to the table, their voice to the table, to say, okay, what is it they need? Because like you said, sometimes it's just, they're not doing the right progress, but it could be that they are really good maybe in one language, but not that great in the other one. And the people sitting on the table don't understand that.
Yeah.
And then also, how you start making that transition, in terms of how you bring their voices to the table to help the students, how you manage that even now as an administrator.
Yeah. So back to that brick wall, right? It wasn't an easy journey, right? So I was in the classroom for many years, right? As you guys shared. And when I was given this opportunity to be an interventionist, at the time we were called resource teachers. So I was just focused on literacy, right? And when I was given this opportunity, I had just come out of the classroom. So I didn't know outside my 4 walls, right? I was always just with my students, and I pretty much kept to myself and just did what I needed to do for them. But coming out of that, right, I was exposed to a lot, right, to the systems the schools have in place or districts have in place for students. And actually that planted the seed for me wanting to pursue administration. So in that experience, I was the interventionist that will come to your classroom, take your group of students, take them to my resource room, and then provide them with literacy instruction. And for the most part, looking back, it used to be a box program, and mainly in English, right? Because we identified that the English, they were not up to par with their monolingual peers. And so then we would do a lot of that. And so then I would then bring them back to your classroom, and then ahí ya quedaba, ¿verdad? So in the most part, I would just say, okay, bye, honey, and they will walk on their own. So there wasn't a lot of collaboration happening between myself as the interventionist and the homework teachers, right? They're just a schedule didn't allow for. And again, this is not right. I'm not critiquing or criticizing a district or structure. It's just what our reality at the time. And so in experiencing that, and that was very redundant to me too, because sometimes I would see a group and then provide them with an intervention that was similar to the other group. And I was seeing ELs, right? Because I was bilingual. So they assign ELs to me and newcomers. And we're talking about students, that spoke Polish or Russian or not just Spanish. And so when we will meet as a RTI team and discuss the data, we're like, they're not growing, right? We would see very minimal growth. They will grow, right? Kids, they're always going to demonstrate growth, but it was very minimal. And so we were like, what is happening? So at that point, in that advocacy, I would say, okay, something we need to be doing more, maybe more pushing, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that. So I started experimenting. I was very fortunate to be I was given autonomy to be able to modify my instructional practices to meet the needs of the students. And I think at that moment, right, that's everyone was really willing to listen, and I will advocate into having them more in core, because what was happening also is that because we weren't collaborating, a lot of the times I was pulling out during tier 1. Right. So we had to be very we had to be very careful not to pull during tier 1, because then they miss out on that. And so when I became an administrator and now I have like that big picture, I was able to see, oh gosh, right. Like as an administrator, and now that we have MTSS and it has evolved into this framework that really goes from tier to tier. I just remember, se me vino la memoria, one of the conversations I was having with, when I had 19 students, 16 out of 19 were not at grade level. And I was having a conversation and the principal says, this is a tier 1 issue. And I was like very offended, like, what do you mean? Right? And so I thought of that, right? In connection to this, and now as an administrator, it all goes back to building capacity, right? And those, sometimes we think, okay, ella es bilingüe, she's bilingual, she understands it all. Like, and I didn't really know then what I know now. And it's just, now I really do want to allow my teachers that opportunity to collaborate, to make tier 1 and tier 2 fluid, right? So all those things that I saw were missing. I'm advocating for something different as an administrator. So
that is really cool that you mentioned that, Crystal. And I love that you lead this conversation that we're having by saying that it's important that we collaborate. Because, that situation that you describe, where an interventionist may come to a classroom, they pull Juanito and Jorgito and Cristalita out, and they take them to do something. That is very common. I see that happening a lot. And from the student perspective, they may not know better. They just know, like, hey, I'm going to go hang out with another teacher in a different setting, and it may be related to what I'm learning in my tier 1 general classroom, or it may not. And if the teachers, the classroom teacher, the intervention teacher, the rest of the team in the interventionist team, the MTSS team, if we are not clear on the learning objectives that we are hoping our students to achieve, regardless of who they are, then there's always going to be that disconnect of what happens between the different settings. And that's why it's so important. I love that you remind us about that. So important to collaborate, to seek those opportunities, to find the common ground and make sure that we are complementing each other's efforts, rather than sometimes maybe working against each other or working on other skills that may not be a priority at the grade level. So thank you so much for that reminder.
And it's so important, especially in a group EL team. Sometimes, they are so small that it just continue working in collaboration, make things a lot easier for everyone. So that is so important, so important. So continue talking then about bringing the voices their voice, the student's voice to the conversation, to the table when we're talking about MTSS. Do you feel like sometimes students might be over-identified for special services just because they are just need extra language support? And if so, then how we can educate other people to look at the student linguistic abilities before making decisions like that?
Good
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do. I definitely think that sometimes we over-identify and sometimes we under-identify, right? So we over-identify when a student appears to have academic, not making academic progress or experiencing behavior scenario or issues, right? Or situations. I don't like to call them issues. But when in reality it's a language need, right? And so I do think that, I remember just even syntax, right? So when we say, we hear students say, I'm going to the house of my abuela, right? I'm going to the house of my grandma. That doesn't, right? That syntax. And then I remember I used to go to my speech pathologist as a teacher and say like, ayúdame, they need speech, right? And so it is like, no, right? But in Spanish, voy a la casa de mi abuela, they're
That's
just
correct.
literally doing a literal translation. And so I think that, back to that, your question about educating, right? So we have to educate on those differences in the language and allow opportunities for those bridges and metalinguistic focus. And then when I talked about under, I feel like sometimes then we have a fear of over identifying. So then we're like, hay que darles tiempo, right? No pasa nada. And then we give them too much time. And then we're like, right? So I think there has to be a balance between the supports that we provide. And just, I think we're very good at targeting the Common Core standards and just objectives in general when it comes to skill, whether it be in literacy or math. But then we forget to unpack those and pull out the language objective and really hit on that. I mean, think about our access scores, right? The lower scores are mostly in speaking. We don't often allow for that oracy building and language acquisition. So I think we just really need more time to really dissect those standards and find ways to include language in it.
Yes. And I think we rly on access results way too much, and we forget that access is a one time. It's a representation of a time during the school year when the students took the test. They take it in January. We don't even get the results until May sometimes. And this year with COVID, who knows when they're coming. And we rely on those results to make high stake decisions for our kiddos, right? So I always say, do we know how Access assesses the language, right? Like as teachers, do we as administrators build the capacity of our teachers so that during the daily instruction, they can pay attention to those areas that Access pays attention during the test? Vocabulary usage, language control, linguistic complexity, those are the three areas that they pay attention to. And one of the areas that I think is really cool in terms of MTSS when supporting multilingual learners is if we are able to find a way to progress monitor language in a similar way that Access would progress monitor language, but do it consistently throughout the year so that we don't rely on one high stakes assessments that we take during one time of year, and then we make decisions for placements, we make decisions for intervention, we may make decisions for sending students to like a domain evaluation and things like that. So no, I think it's good. Do you, I don't know, in you guys' district, do you guys have any sort of progress monitoring for language, or do you have any tips or things that we can give to our viewers about how they could do that if they're interested in monitoring language?
in our current district, we do not.
Yeah.
We're definitely working towards
To monitor the
developing,
language.
the structure. Yeah,
Mhm.
but and I think it's right. Like we often then resort to assessment that are available in Spanish, right? But not necessarily. It's more like discarding like their comprehension of the language, not so much hitting at the language. So and
Mhm.
we're definitely having conversations as a district on how to get better at that. So at the moment, no, I don't have any.
But I also want to also remind too, like in with Crystal's first response was that WIDA also has the indicators too. You know, they kind of show us like, you know, are we doing all this stuff, you know, before
Mhm.
we can consider also students to special services or things like that, or even just enrichment too, you know, because that's also something that's is overlooked. And I one of the comments too that I want to make two comments actually. One,
Mhm.
that when Krista was talking about the kids needing speech, right? I always remember all our kids when they are learning the sound of the S. You know what they say, "Stop it," and things like that, right? And that is so common because even I with my own kids, I do it all the time and joke about it all the time. You know, when they're bothering me, just stop it. You know, because it's just we need to just also enjoy those kind of things, you know, because it's part of the learning of the language. But I also remember when Crystal said about sometimes we also tell, oh no, we need to wait and wait and wait. And I think of one, yeah, you were the assistant principal by then, but I remember having a conversation in one of our meetings about the student. They're actually learning Spanish as their third language, and the teacher
Yeah.
was very concerned on the progress of the student. And we're like, we need to give it some time. You know, this is a third language now. We're not talking just a second language or things like that. This is a third language,
Mhm.
and we did. We just continue monitoring the student, and again, we monitor it by using a lot of fluency, of course. You know how they're growing their fluency and things like that. Um, but in this particular case, yeah, it was good to just wait, and eventually the kids was reading in all three languages and um, understanding and writing. So that was great. That was awesome to see. But that was my comments. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. And you trigger a thought in my head, Jorge, because I remember those days at the building with you.
Mhm.
And I think, when it comes to waiting, there's an art to waiting, right? It's not just like, oh, we're just going to sit here and wait and see what happens, right? We have to be mindful of some things that are going to give us an indicator if the students are progressing or not, right? Um, how long have they been in the United States, right? Were they born in the United States? Were they immigrants? Like, where are they in their language learning journey? Is definitely one of them. We also talked about the WIDA 7 integral factors. I don't know if you guys
Mhm.
are familiar with those,
Right.
because I think that those gives us that opportunity that even though we might be waiting, we're not really waiting. We're just monitoring some areas before we decide to make a step. Right? So I pulled them up here. We weren't planning on talking about the 7 integral factors, everyone, but this is live. This is unscripted,
Yeah.
and we're going with wherever the conversation is taking us. And I just pulled them up here on my screen. Talks about the learning environment, the academic achievement and the instruction, the world language and literacy proficiency, the personal and family connections. Those are
Yeah.
very,
Very
very, very
important.
important.
Mhm.
So if you have not had an opportunity to look at the 7 integral factors, and I am going to put them right here for you guys. It's just a quick link that is going to take you straight to that resource that is going to be is going to explain how to use them so that you're waiting, but we're not really waiting. We're just monitoring.
And now you guys all see how why Juan was such an amazing also assistant principal because I just say, hey, how about this? Oh, Jorge, I know what you're talking about. Here it is. Boom. There we go, Juan. Thank you, man.
Oh, no worries, Jorge. No worries.
Yeah.
And now that I pulled that up, I lost my notes over here. So give me a minute.
Don't,
I'm gonna go back to my notes here.
don't
I'm
worry. I
back.
actually have
I'm back in there.
another question then for Crystal too.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So
Take it away.
when we what are some of the considerations that we must take into account when planning tier support for bilingual students?
Good question.
Yeah. Ya los dijo Juan. I'm just kidding. So right, like you have to look at their former experience, their former school experience of students. I think that right in our ELs, we got to look at their linguistic profile. Griselda, I see you on here, so you're going to be proud of me for mentioning linguistic profiles. Cultural background, right? Like all your anecdotal. Okay, so I think about all the data we collect, right? So we have to constantly look at that and refer to, teachers. You are the experts when it comes to your students, like your students. And so I think about in looking at all that, once you decipher it, right, there's going to be so much. So you have to hone in on like, what is the specific skill? What is the specific goal you want to target? And then making sure that, back to that progress monitoring, it's aligned with what you're going to be progress monitoring, right? So the assessment is aligned to the instruction, to the progress monitoring tool, to then, and not wait those 6 to 8 weeks, have those moments in time when you're collecting, your anecdotals and just observing your students, and not waiting to those 6 to 8 to say, no hizo progreso, right? He or she didn't make progress. It's just that accountability and fidelity checks in between. So I think those are definitely things to consider, as well as, are you allowing time and building in or see opportunities in language acquisition, right? So I think that's a language that's a disconnect, right? Like vamos a hablar de language otro día, and we just talk about the skill, right? Like say we're talking about literacy, we're just talking about summarizing. My student can't summarize, but is this passage culturally right? Like, are you providing a passage that builds in their culture? Are they really understanding? I had a colleague, right? She said to me, you guys eat mole? I'm like, mole? No, that animal that hace hoyitos in the tierra. No, I don't eat that. Why? She's like, a student wrote about it. And I'm like, oh, you mean mole? And she's like, right? So I think that sometimes even that is an example, right? Oh, that cultural piece. So we just have to be very purposeful in the word that you said, that was explicit, right? Everything has to be very explicit. And so we can't just, wing it when it comes to language. We have to be, or conversations that we're having in relations to, we have to really hone in our students. We have to really hone in on what are their needs.
Yes.
How we're going to target those. So.
And I think you hit it right on the nail, Crystal. We focus on the assessments, we focus on the learning skills that we're hoping our students to learn. We align our learning outcomes with our assessments. We monitor, we get to know our students for who they are and what they bring to the classroom. That's just the formula for helping.
But there's there's also sometimes one thing that we forget is to give it time.
Yes.
Give it time, because sometimes we want to see that progress. We want to see that kid speaking another language in a year or two. It takes time, and we have to remind ourselves that it takes 5 to 7 years to be proficient in a language. So just wait in the process.
And with waiting, right, kind of like what we said earlier, it's not just waiting, it's monitoring the language progression, right? And we know that a student is going to, I'm still learning English, but if we know that learning a second language takes time, 5 to 7 years, then we're not waiting. We're monitoring how our students are growing, how they're developing within that window that we decide to give them for them to show us what they know.
Absolutely.
Great. Awesome chat, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. And we could talk for hours on this. I can already tell. What do you guys think? We last week we talked about we needing a part 2 for curriculum instruction. I think we're gonna need a part 2 for MTSS as well.
Absolutely, we do. I think we do. Yeah.
So, Crystal, if you could summarize and maybe give us some tips, for all of us who are joining here and dual language, us included, and if they're watching us live or maybe they're watching us later on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and they want to know the top 3 consejos, right? The top 3 tips that we can take away right away and implement in our school settings, whether we're district administrators or building principals, assistant principals, to teachers. When it comes to MTSS, what would those 3 things be?
You're asking a Latina to do it in 3? Okay. We need to make sure that ELs have access, all students have access to Tier 1 core instruction that is founded on evidence-based practices and is culturally relevant, right?
Yes.
There must be time built in the schedule for collaboration around the needs of students, and language acquisition cannot be discussed in isolation as it's part of all academic content. So we're language learners, all of us, right? So
that was great.
I love those. Jorge, summarize.
Okay, so I wasn't prepared for that part. I was actually just already thinking on the wrap up of the show.
No, I tell you what, you mentioned, the last one caught my attention. The language should not be discussed in isolation. I think that kind of summarized the whole series of dual language spot right now, right? When we're talking dual language, it can be just that little program that happens in 2 classrooms in our school, or maybe 1. Once we have a dual language classroom in one of our campuses, we are a dual language school, and we have to consider language and not do it in isolation. That was the last one that caught my attention. Yeah.
Right. And like she said too, it is very important that we also bring to the table what the student needs are, and we accommodate to that, not just following a box program or things like that. Let's see what the student needs and support based on their needs.
Yes.
All righty. So Juan, we are already at 37 minutes. So I want to thank Crystal for being with us tonight. Thank you so much for being here, amiga, and for joining me in this crazy roller coaster. So I really, really appreciate you being here with us tonight.
I appreciate the invite, and I felt honored to have been invited to your show. So, Juan and Jorge.
Yeah.
Thank you, Crystal, for joining us. We learned a lot. We will continue talking and staying in touch. And yes, let's find more opportunities to collaborate, continue being advocates for dual language education. Everyone else, thank you for joining us tonight. We will see you next week. We are going to be continue with our talk about advocacy for dual language education, but we are going to have one of our good friends, Alberto Mora, who is going to be joining us to talk about talent recruitment. How do we invite people who are passionate and dedicated and just awesome teachers to come and work with our programs in our school? So please join us next week. We'll see you then.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.